I mentioned it briefly before, but one of my absolute favorite games of all time, not counting the vast majority of the Pokemon games, is Resident Evil 4. However, my experience with the series wasn't really all that grand, so to speak. There are a lot of Resident Evil games, but the only one that I kind of played before it that's a lot like this, like I've mentioned before, was Dino Crisis. I never played 1, 2, 3. I would eventually play Code Veronica, but way down the line after Resident Evil 4. I would play through 5, 6, 7 was fantastic. And then eventually we got the announcement of the Resident Evil 2 remake. Now that was something that everyone everywhere's was just excited to see, because I'm sure for a vast majority of people that was like the nostalgia game that everyone wanted. We had the first Resident Evil remake, but now we're finally going to get the Resident Evil 2 one, the one that we've been waiting for all this time. But like I said, I never played Resident Evil 2, so my excitement for the game wasn't stemming from the game itself. It was that it looked a lot like Resident Evil 4, but had like the graphics, art style, and the gameplay that was very similar to Resident Evil 7, which was fantastic to play through. So eventually I would get the game. I was excited for it because it has one of my favorite video game characters ever in Leon in there. But yeah, I would go through a lot of money to get the same, because I also got the special edition, because I'm just a sucker for those kinds of things. But that's all on the side. What did I think about one of the game's biggest releases last year? That's what we're going to talk about here today. So, without further ado, let's dive right in and take a look at Resident Evil 2. So to, again, preface real quick, I'm not a lore buff when it comes to the Resident Evil universe. There is so much flavor text, spin-offs, side games, movies, and twists all throughout that listening to my brief summation of this game's plot would be an injustice to yourself, since you'd be missing out on so much more. That, and to an extent, RE2 Remake's story has a sort of remixed continuity compared to the original, playing itself more like it's in its own universe compared to the original. But with that aside, here's what we're dealing with. So RE2 Remake stars you as either Leon S. Kennedy or Claire Redfield. The zombie outbreak in the Arklay Mountains has spread into the nearby city of Raccoon City, infecting the populace, sending the remaining survivors into a state of panic. Claire heads to Raccoon City in search of her brother Chris from the first game, not knowing the dangers that await. Leon is heading there as he was supposed to have started his first days as an officer at Raccoon City, but was ordered to stay away after the initial outbreak. Wanting to try and help any way he can, he too heads towards the city to help. After making a pit stop, the two meet at a gas station just outside the city, defending themselves from some straggler zombies roaming around, and decide to work together to try and get through the chaotic mess. However, a series of unfortunate events transpire, and the two are split from each other. They then decide to try and meet up at the police station as they descend into the madness. So, again, just to preface real quick, I haven't played the vast majority of these games, and there's a lot. So there's always this idea of a grander overarching plot that just looms over this game and this series as a whole. There's so many twists and turns and different strains of the viruses that you're dealing with, and all this other nonsense that my own small brief summation of this plot, I'm sure, does not do the entire game justice or the series justice. So I just want you guys to acknowledge that just real quick. Now, I know it's not great, but it's something. With that being said, though, the plot to this game, at least, isn't anything spectacular. That being said, I would say that the dynamic between Claire and Sherry was actually kind of interesting compared to Leon and his main story side character with Ada, which is something that kind of disappointed me a little bit because I really wanted to like Leon in this game, but it wasn't quite the same Leon as I remembered. I played RE4 religiously growing up, one of the biggest reasons being Leon himself. He's such a snarky, quippy badass that you can't help but love the dude. But here, he's just a bland character, which is funny since everyone around him treats him like a badass, like they know what his legacy is going to be like. But he just really doesn't earn it here. Now, part of that could be chalked up to him being younger, not quite as mature, or more naive, or whatever. But even an inkling of what's to come would have been nice for one of my favorite video game characters. When it comes to his character-specific sidekick, though, Ada, I felt like one simple job change actually ruined the intrigue with her. We all know what she ends up becoming, but it was the corniness of her pretending to be the wife of a scientist, trying to find her husband in all this chaos, that was just like the right level of corny when it came to her eventual reveal. Her being an undescriptive agent really doesn't quite hit the same note with me. But that's not all we're here to talk about. This is a video game, so we got a game to talk about, and it is fantastic when the game lets you have fun with it at least. As Leon or Claire, you run around with a typical third-person perspective, collecting items, weapons, and pieces to complete certain puzzles. Your initial inventory is pretty limited, but you can collect upgrades to both inventory space and to most weapons you collect along the journey. If space gets to be too much though, and it will, you can drop off items at most save points and the item box that's usually there, where you can collect said items again later on, or at any other box you find kicking around. Along the way, you'll encounter many zombies roaming the hallways, and on a first impressions playthrough, trying to determine which body slumped on the floor is just a body and not a zombie can be terrifying as you go through the game. The small problem I have, and I guess it might just be me, but I wish there was a better indicator of a zombie's death, so that way I wouldn't be questioning after pumping a bunch of bullets into an enemy. All zombies do have a set amount of health, and it doesn't really matter where you strike them, every spot does the same damage. I just kinda wished that there was a better indicator than having to waste a bullet to see if they're down, or wasting a knife swing on a zombie. And that's another thing, you can pick up knives all around for use as self-defense weapons, but knives have a set durability to them before they break. Now, some people have said that it adds to the survivability aspect of the game, and I won't argue that that certainly is one way to look at it. To me though, I wasn't a fan. Having this sort of control scheme and gameplay style that is so similar to RE4 begs for a backup weapon at all times. You can unlock an infinite use knife, and that is my preferred way to play. If anything, if they wanted to go with knives that could be taken away if grabbed by zombies, I wish that they were infinite use, but significantly less scattered about. Maybe like 3 or 4 max throughout a playthrough. That way, if you are grabbed, you have to consider the ramifications of leaving it behind or taking down the zombie to retrieve the knife. But that's neither here nor there. The gunplay in this is still pretty strong. Guns have a satisfying oomph to them, and the enemies all react according to the area it was shot at, slowly degrading further and further the more damage the enemy takes. You have the regular zombies, of course, alongside some zombie dogs which zip all around all over the place, as well as the lickers, which react to sound, forcing you to be as quiet as possible, even with looming threats after you. Threats like Mr. X. Ugh. Meet Mr. X, everybody. He likes candlelight dinners, going for walks on the beach, and punching you in the face. He shows up partway into each campaign and stalks you all throughout the RPD. Now, part of it is kind of neat with him. He reacts to you making loud noises and will hunt you down pretty much anywhere as you are in the station. It means learning to deal with enemies silently, or avoiding them altogether, or face the wrath of this indestructible threat looming your way. The problem comes in parts. Firstly, I don't quite think he reacts wholly in that way. You can try and track Mr. X all you want, but in the end, the game ultimately dictates right if he's going to find you, no matter where he may have been. What I'm trying to say is there was like one moment where I led Mr. X to the dark room. I had to go to the other side of the RPD to collect some items, and I had to prep for the trip over. Going on the lower floors would have been easier, but I did have a path either direction. I listened carefully to Mr. X's movements, and I could tell that he was going back down the hallway, the way I wanted to go. So I spent a lot of time prepping to go the other way. I decided to go down the hallway that you encountered the first liquor at. Path of least resistance and all. And I walked all the way there. And I was right at the door that was going to let me be home free. And then... You son of a... So maybe it was a coincidence, but that kind of thing happened more than once to me, and it got more frustrating than interesting with Mr. X, when all I wanted to do was just finish a puzzle and move on. The other thing is that Mr. X shows up no matter what playthrough you do. The original RE2 only had Mr. X show up in the B route for each character, offering two very different gameplay experiences. One more centered around major puzzle solving, the other testing your survival skills. Here, though, he shows up in all four scenarios, and it loses all sense of impact because of that revelation. You can plan stuff around Mr. X to make it so that you lower the amount of time you're forced to interact with him, but that's only for those who have chugged through the game and know every inch of the game top to bottom. Mr. X is just a bad beginner's obstacle. And I can hear some of you now. Oh, you're just bad at the game. Derp. Well, the thing is that at the very least, I beat Resident Evil 4 on professional, so that's kind of an achievement in and of itself. And so you'd think that I should be able to handle this game on normal. But when it comes to Mr. X, he's more annoying than anything. I think the developers kind of intended him to be like this intimidating or even a scary presence. But every time he just shows up, I'm not scared. I just feel like, great. I spent all this time preparing to go and complete this puzzle, and now I have to take the long way around again. Ugh. One thing to note, though, about the different scenarios, though, is that I find that the lack of change throughout the story actually kind of hurts it more. Like I said, with the original RE2, each campaign was actually very different, especially when you had to include Mr. X to each one. But the actual core story also changed quite a bit. But here, though, despite the opening actually being somewhat different, whereas you're running through the streets with the A scenario and then you're running through the back alley towards the RPD in the B one, there's really no major difference between the stories on both sides, of course, which makes it even weirder. Leon and Claire both fight the same bosses, except for the very final one, and some small differences when it comes to weapons and such. But other than that, it completely kind of kills the continuity with its own story, since you can't really say which character's story is the most significant one to play through to get the most out of the lore. I don't know. I felt it kind of frustrating. It was kind of nice that they changed the starting loadout for each character, kind of giving you like a special weapon for the B route. But other than that, in the kind of revamped puzzles, I was kind of disappointed with the different quote-unquote scenarios. The puzzles are fine. I really got no issues with them. I do like the whole idea of like observing an item all around, trying to find secret buttons or stuff like that. I know it was in older games, but I do still kind of like that idea. The boss fights are entertaining, and the challenge and survival portion of it is fun. Other than that, the game obviously runs on the RE engine, and it looks incredible. Character models and facial capture is on point, and the gore and monster designs is exceptionally gross, which it should be. As for the music, I don't know if it was just me, but I didn't really feel like the music was all that special. I think the original soundtrack is a bit better, but I think in this game's case, a lack of music is fine since the atmospheric sounds are more important to listen to, which is far better. It just baffles me that they did end up creating an official soundtrack for this game. It was hard to think if I really liked this game more than Resident Evil 7. I think I kind of do, just mostly because I prefer fighting zombies in a more urban setting than I did fighting hillbillies and the ooze monsters in the backwoods of wherever. And also, both games share basically the same type of game style, so it was fine. But in that respect, it's kind of impressive to see, since now that we have the Resident Evil 3 remake coming out very soon, actually, within the same engine that they're using, Capcom has a very interesting place within the gaming community, as they can now start what seems to be pumping out all these great quality games in almost no time, unless they've just been like really preparing way before. But they have this awesome engine that they can work with, and they can keep making these fantastic games like this, and to do it as well without having to use these like backhanded developer systems that everyone's using, like with the microtransactions and other stuff like that. Capcom's doing really well, and I'm quite impressed to see, and I'm excited to see where they might go with this. Maybe get a Dino Crisis remake in this engine? I don't know. It certainly would be pretty feasible, but I'm just super happy as to how well this game did, and I'm excited to see where they go from here. But anywho, thank you all so much for watching. If you like what you saw, you can click right up here to check out some of my other videos that I've done, or if you really feel like it, you can click right up here to subscribe. And until next time, guys, I will see you all later.